nothing so green. Here we come a-wandering over there to be seen. Love and joy come to you, and to you a wassail too. And God bless you and send you a happy new year. And God send you a happy new year.
One Christmas was so much like another in those years around the sea town. Now, out of all sound except the distant speaking of the voices I sometimes hear in that moment before sleep. And I can never remember whether it snowed for 6 days and 6 nights when I was 12, or whether it snowed for 12 days and 12 nights when I was 6.
All the Christmases rolled down to the two-toned sea like a cold and headlong moon puddling down the street that was our house. And they stopped at the rim of the ice-edged fish-freezing waves, and I plunge my hands in the snow, and I bring out whatever I can find. In goes my hand into that wool, white, bell-toed ball of holidays, resting at the rim of the carol-singing sea, and out come Mrs. Prothero and the firemen.
It was on the afternoon of Christmas Eve, and I was in Mrs. Prothero's garden with their son Jim waiting for cats, and it was snowing.
It was always snowing at Christmas. December, in my memory, is white as Lapland, although there were no reindeer. But there were cats. Patient, cold, and callous, our hands wrapped in socks, we waited to snowball the cats. Sleek and long as jaguars and horrible whiskered, spitting and snarling, they would sneak and sidle over the white-backed garden walls.
And the lynx-eyed hunters, Jim and I, fur-capped and moccasin trappers from Hudson Bay,
Off Mumble's Road,
would hurl our deadly snowballs at the green of their eyes.
the wise cats never appeared. We were so still, Eskimo-footed, Arctic marksmen in the muffling silence of the eternal snows.
Eternal, ever since Wednesday.
That we never heard Mrs. Prothero's first cry from her igloo at the bottom of the garden. Or if we heard it at all, it was to us like the far-off challenge of our enemy and prey, the neighbor's polar cat. But soon the voice grew louder.
Fire! Cried Mrs. Prothero, and she beat the dinner gong. And we ran down the garden with the snowballs in our arms toward the house, and smoke indeed was pouring out of the dining room, and the gong was bombulating, and Mrs. Prothero was announcing ruin like a town crier in Pompeii.
This was better than all the cats in Wales standing on the wall in a row. We bounded into the house, laden with snowballs, and stopped at the open door of the smoke-filled room. Something was burning, all right. Perhaps it was Mr. Prothero, who always slept there after midday dinner with a newspaper over his face.
But he was standing in the middle of the room saying, "A fine Christmas," and smacking at the smoke with a slipper.
Call the fire brigade!
Cried Mrs. Prothero as she beat the gong.
They will not be there. It is Christmas.
There were no fires to be seen, only clouds of smoke, and Mr. Prothero standing in the middle of them, waving his slipper as though he were conducting.
Do something.
And we threw all our snowballs into the smoke. And I think we missed Mr. Prothero. Then we ran out of the house to the telephone box.
Let us call the police as well.
Yeah, and the ambulance.
And Ernie Jenkins. He likes fire.
But we only called the fire brigade, and soon a fire engine came, and 3 tall men in helmets brought a hose into the house. And Mr. Prothero got out just in time before they turned it on.
Nobody could have had a noisier Christmas Eve.
And when the firemen turned off the hose and were standing in the wet, smoky room, Jim's aunt, Miss Prothero, came downstairs and peered in at them. Jim and I waited very quietly to hear what she would say because she said the right thing always. She looked at the three tall firemen in their shining helmets, standing among the smoke and cinders and dissolving snowballs, and she said,
"Would you like anything to read?"
Good King Wenceslas looked out on the feast of Stephen, when the snow lay round about, deep and crisp and even. Brightly shone the moon that night, though the frost was cruel, when a poor man came in sight, gathering winter fuel.
Years and years ago, when I was a child, when there were wolves in Wales, and birds the color of red flannel petticoats whisked past the harp-shaped hills, when we sang and wallowed all night and day in caves that smelled like, well, Sunday afternoons in a damp front farmhouse parlor. And we chased with the jawbones of deacons, the English, the bears, before the motor car, before the wheel, before the Duchess-faced horse, when we rode the daft and happy hills bareback. It snowed and it snowed, and here a small boy says,
"It snowed last year too. I made a snowman, and my brother knocked it down, and I knocked him down, and then we had tea."
But that was not the same snow, I say. Our snow was not only shaken from the whitewashed buckets down the sky, it came shoaling out of the ground and swam and drifted out of the arms and the hands and the bodies of the trees. And the snow grew overnight on the roofs of the houses like a pure grandfathered moss, minutely ivied the walls, and settled on the postman opening the gate like a dumb thunderstorm of white torn Christmas cards.
Were there postmen then too?
With sprinkling eyes and wind-chilled noses on spread frozen feet, they crunched up to the doors and rapped on them resolutely. But all that the children could hear was the ringing of bells.
You mean that the postman went rat-a-tat-tat and the doorbells rang?
I mean that the bells the children could hear were inside them.
I only hear thunder sometimes, never bells.
there were church bells too.
Inside them?
No, in the back black-white belfries tugged by bishops and storks, and they rang their tidings over the bandaged town, over the frozen foam of the powder and ice cream hills, over the crackling sea. It seemed that all the churches boomed for joy under my window, and the weathercocks crew for Christmas on our fence.
Get back to the postman.
They were just ordinary postmen, fond of walking and dogs and Christmas and the snow. They knocked on the doors with blue knuckles.
Ours has a black knocker.
And then they stood on the white welcome mat in the little drifted porches and huffed and puffed, making ghosts with their breath, and jogged from foot to foot like little boys waiting to go out.
And then the presents?
And then the presents after the Christmas box, and the cold postman with a rose on his button nose tingled down the tea tray slithered run of the chilly glinting hill. He went in his icebound boots like a man on fishmonger's slabs. He wagged his bag like a frozen camel's hump, dizzily turned the corner on one foot, and then, by God, he was gone.
Deck the halls with bells of holly, fa la 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 la. 'Tis the season to be jolly, fa la 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 la. Don we now our gay carol, fa la 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 la. Hail the ancient Yuletide carol, fa la 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 la.
Get back to the present.
There were useful presents, engulfing mufflers of the old coach days, and mittens made for giant sloths. Zebra scarves of a substance like silky gum that could be tug-of-war down to the galoshes.
And blinding tam o'shanters, like patchwork tea cozies, and bunny-suited busbies, and balaclavas for victims of the head-shrinking tribes.
From aunts who always wore wool next to the skin. They wore mustached and rasping vests that made you wonder why the aunts had any skin left at all.
And once I had a little crocheted nose bag from an aunt, now alas, no longer whinnying with us.
And pictureless books in which small boys, though warned not to, would skate on Farmer Giles' pond, and did, and drowned.
And books that told me everything about the wasp, except why.
Go on to the useless presents.
Bags of moist and many-colored jelly babies and a folded flag.
And a false nose, and a train conductor's cap.
And a machine that punched tickets and rang a bell.
Never a catapult?
Once by mistake, that no one could explain, a little hatchet, a celluloid duck that made, when you pressed it, a most unduck-like sound, a mewing moo that an ambitious cat might make who wished to be a cow.
And a painting book in which I could make the grass, the trees, the sea, and the animals any color I pleased. And still the dazzling sky blue sheep are grazing in the red field under the rainbow-billed and pea-green birds.
Oh, and the candies, the hard-boils, toffee, fudge, and all sorts. Crunches and cracknels, humbugs, glaciers, and marzipan. Oh, and butter Welsh for the Welsh.
And troops of bright tin soldiers who, if they could not fight, could always run.
And snakes and families and happy ladders.
And easy hobby games for little engineers, complete with instructions. Oh, easy for Leonardo.
And a whistle to make the dogs bark, to wake up the old man next door, to make him beat on the wall with his stick, to shake our picture off the wall.
And a packet of cigarettes. You put one in your mouth, if you can find it. And you stood at the corner of a street, and you waited for hours in vain for an old lady to come by and scold you for smoking a cigarette. And then, with a smirk, you ate it.
And then it was breakfast under the balloons.
Were there uncles like at our house?
There are always uncles at Christmas.
And people waiting or scooting back from chapel with taproom noses and wind-bust cheeks, all albinos, huddled their stiff, black, jarring feathers against the irreligious snow.
Mistletoe hung from the gas brackets in all the front parlors.
There was sherry and walnuts and bottled beer and crackers by the dessert spoons. The cats in their furabouts watched the fire, and the high-heaped fire spat, all ready for the chestnuts and the mulling pokers.
A few men sat in their parlors without their collars, uncles certainly, trying out their new cigars, holding them out judiciously at arm's length, and then returning them to their mouths, coughing, and then holding them out again as if waiting for the explosion.
And a few small aunts, not wanted in the kitchen, nor anywhere else for that matter, sat on the very edge of their chairs, poised and brittle, afraid to break, like faded cups and saucers.
Not many those mornings trod the piping streets. An old man, always fawn-bouldered, yellow-gloved, and at this time of years with spats of snow, would take his constitutional to the white bowling green and back, as he would take it white on wet or fine, on Christmas Day or Doomsday.
Sometimes, two hale young men with briar pipes blazing, no overcoats and wind-blown scarves, would trudge unspeaking down to the forlorn sea, to work up an appetite, to blow away the fumes, who knows, to walk into the waves until nothing of them was left but the two furling smoke clouds of their inextinguishable briars.
And then I would be slapdashing home. Oh, the smells of the gravies of the dinners of others, the bird smell, the brandy, the pudding, the mince, all would curl up into my nostrils.
For dinner, we had turkey and blazing pudding.
And after dinner, the uncles sat in front of the fire, loosened all buttons, put their large, moist hands over their watch chains, groaned a little, and slept.
Mothers, aunts, and sisters scuttled to and fro bearing tureens. Auntie Bessie, who had already been frightened twice by a clockwork mouse, whimpered at the sideboard and had some elderberry wine.
The dog was sick.
Auntie Dosa had to have 3 aspirins.
But Auntie Hannah, who liked port, stood in the middle of the snowbound backyard, singing like a big bosom thrush.